when we are doing the discussion. Okay. Hello. Hi. Thank you so much for settling, and I'm very happy to welcome all of you for the 24th cycle of CCT Conversations, which is actually a continuation of the 23rd, which is titled uh, Architectural Practice in India, a Millennial Archaeology. And just before I give a kind of a brief summary of this, I'll want to tell you about CCT Conversations. I am Anuj Daga. I am an assistant professor at the School of Environment and Architecture, and I also coordinate the CCT events here. CCT is the School of Environment and Architecture's outreach program, and CCT organizes events, lectures, symposia, exhibitions in order to engage with the larger artistic and cultural discursive sphere within the city and also outside. CCT events are completely open to all public and are attended by a range of audiences, including students, architects, professionals, academics, also locals sometimes. And over the last 10 years or 11 years almost, we have conducted more than 200 public talks, all of which are archived and publicly accessible from the school website and are all on YouTube. So if you have missed any, or if you want to go back to any, you can definitely browse through our C YouTube channel. This lecture series is also supported partly by the Urban Center Mumbai, which is a center that holds kind of it's a node for dialogue, ideating, deliberation to carry out research and to communicate urban planning, urban design, urban conservation, and sustainable urban development discussions around the city, and primarily the Mumbai metropolitan region. And to come to specifically this series and the talk, which is Architectural Practice in India, a Millennial Archaeology, it's actually a series which was conceived to examine how architectural practice in India has developed over the last 3 decades, and particularly within the framework of the millennial shift in political economy. And we are looking at what forces of power, ambition, and institutional kind of reconfigurations have shaped architectural production during this particular period, and how it reorganizes the delivery of the built environment, and what aspects of practice gain currency in the emerging market, and how does the professional architect find their own realignments and redirections in this space. And so in this regard, the sessions that we have had in the first semester of this annual academic year include a session on organizational restructurings, on the turn to large multinational firms in architecture, the focus and the rise in the making of farmhouses and second homes around urban centers. We have also seen how interior design became a very important practice or domain to practice for architects. We have seen how the discourse on sustainability and green building practices have sharply risen and carved out its own domain within the new kind of emerging bylaws and policies around green building. Also, how heritage conservation took a very sharp kind of specialization in the post-90s period. Finally, we ended our last series with an urbanistic impulse, or the urban turn, so to say, in architectural practice. In this season, we have four more discussions lined up in the same kind of looking at these practice series. And today's series is on media practices in architecture. And to give a brief background on today's kind of talk, with the advent of new channels and information flows during the 90s, such as broadcasting, internet, and mobile technologies, architectural ideas came to be consumed in very new ways and also in an increased intensity. where on one hand the first generation architects in India were busy compiling monographs, chronicling their own kind of entire practices. There were also new publishing markets that emerged, which fueled public debates on taste, also on global influence and architectural production. After 2000 particularly, architecture journalism and independent magazines and digital platforms amplified commentaries on the built environment. And moreover, in the last 15 years, we also see how exhibitions have gained prominence as discursive sites for engaging architecture within the public domain. And along with this, institutions such as CEPT Archives, the Kochi Biennale Foundation have given distinctive push to architectural imagination through, creating the space for creating archives, or also to create experimental architecture as pavilions and, architectural, experimenting architectural ideas. Here, the object of architecture and the role of architect has been centered more emphatically in the cultural sphere. And large architectural exhibitions over the last 2 decades, such as the State of Architecture or even Venice Space, State of Housing, have foregrounded archival thinking, spatial inquiry, and also public engagement within the architectural process. Across these shifts, media has moved from mere documentation to discourse, from objectifying buildings to mediating their cultural, political, and environmental lives. And this is reshaping how architecture is produced, interpreted, and remembered in India. And so this panel is specifically crafted to reflect on how media practices such as writing, archiving, exhibition making have actively been partaking role in the shape of reshaping of architectural discourse and spatial production in India. And for this session, we have very interesting people. Unfortunately, I must say that our third speaker today, Rituraj Parekh, could not join because of the whole fiasco with the Indigo flights. So he'll not be able to join us today. But we are very happy to have Nisha Nair and Kevan Mehta with us, both with whom I've had the opportunity to engage at various occasions as a teacher, as a student, and as a colleague. So I'll give brief introductions to both of their practices, who have kind of done a lot in this space of media practice, and in some sense were also my breeding ground for kind of shaping and crafting my own practice. Nisha Nair is an urban researcher, educator, and founder of the People Place Project, which is a collective exploring people-place relationships through storytelling, research, and public engagement. She is currently pursuing her PhD at IIT Bombay, where her works examines the intersections of gender mobility and urban inequality, with focus on how women's everyday movements shape and are shaped by the city. And this she is pursuing along with her, a really long-standing practice in writing, publishing, where she uses that as an instrument to actually kind of spearhead and push for urban dialogue and through her own ideas. She has taught architecture and urban design she has taught at architecture and urban design schools, guiding students in connecting design practice with social and spatial justice. And her work bridges teaching and practice, seeking to make cities more inclusive by foregrounding everyday lived experiences of movement and belonging. And we have Kevan Mehta. Kevan Mehta is a theorist and critic in the fields of visual culture, architecture, and city studies. Mehta has studied architecture, literature, Indian aesthetics, and cultural studies. And in 2017, he completed his doctoral studies in the Center for the Study of Culture and Society in Bangalore under the aegis of Manipal University. In April 2022, he was appointed as the Dean at Balwant Sheth School of Architecture at NMIMS University. He was recently elected to the coveted International Committee of Architectural Critics. He authored Alice in Bhuleshwar, Navigating a Mumbai Neighborhood under Yoda Press, and also the book, The Architecture of I Am Kadri, and has written for various books, artist catalogs, architecture exhibitions, and journals. He curated the mid-career retrospective on the work of architect and urban designer Rahul Mehrotra, and is currently working on other architect biographies, which include the works of architect and educationist Sen Kapadia, as well as architect and revivalist designer Jitendra Mistry, and architect and interior designer Ramesh Edwankar. He has curated various exhibitions and delivered lectures across institutions in India and abroad, including Centre Pompidou Paris, Cornell University, Parsons New School, New York, as well as conferences in Portugal, Hungary, China, and Italy. And we'll see a little bit of his work today, because we have given our speakers only 10 minutes so that we can spend more time in conversing about the subject at hand. With that, I would like to kind of invite maybe Kevan to present his work first. So Kevan, I'll hand you over the pointer.
Should I move from? Yeah, yeah. Hi, thank you Anuj, thank you Prasad Rupali and everybody at C for inviting me. Very happy to be here also because I'm at a place where my batchmates and classmates Prasad and Rupali are heading this space, so it's a special privilege, and many colleagues. But Anuj, if you've been my student and colleague, you should know giving 10 minutes to somebody is a dangerous thing. But I'll keep it brief. I'll keep more to the conversations. I have prepared this sort of presentation not to go through it in detail, but I just want to sort of visually introduce to you what does it mean to have an exhibition practice besides many other things, and just the range of different exhibitions. So since Anuj in our pre-event conversation emphasized that I talk about the exhibition practice, and it's never been a conscious practice. I think it's a exhibition making or curating emerged out of the general practice of engaging with the architecture fraternity and architecture field in the position of being a theorist and a critic. And one thing I'll clarify, which we can discuss a bit later, but I have grown more conscious of it, especially when I was teaching the entire history theory track at CEPT in the master's program. And now I'm conscious about it even when I do the undergrad but senior classes, tracks on theory or architecture research, etc., that one is interested in speaking not to the field of theorists, but one is interested in speaking to the field of practice, the architecture practice. So when one is talking of research or theory, it is intended towards enhancing the nature of architecture practice. Or what does this kind of a discourse mean to sort of pulling up practice to sort of live to contemporary challenges and shape itself? Because one thing that we talk about, that good media practices, which is journalism, teaching obviously, but things that have emerged today, like doing exhibitions, etc., it's the only way that the field discusses its own self. How do all of you and our colleagues who become architects, how do you self-evaluate your own work? What's the sphere in which you know what you're doing is fine or not? You one job may get you another job, it will get you a fee, you may be able to run an office, you may be able to participate in a collaborative office or in a team, you may be able to live through the cycles of practice. But what are the benchmarks of evaluating how is the architecture field shaping itself? So as much as it may be a question for a practice or an office to look at its own self, I think when some of us are in the education space, it also becomes a challenge for us. How are we shaping your curricula? What shapes curricula? How does sort of, if curricula is evaluated every few years, what are the benchmarks for evaluating curricula? So I think the question of media practices or theoretical practices is actually about investing in the field of practice. It is not a per se theoretical engagement by itself, which it can be. So it can be a theoretical engagement which purely contributes to sort of philosophical discourse, cultural studies or cultural theory discourse. So it can contribute to pure knowledge production. But I think the clarification and the intention is, and especially when you've been an editor, that you're contributing to the field of practice. The everyday office has to self-reflect. And where does it find the ground or the material to self-reflect? Also, all these practices, whether it is sort of editing a magazine, which I have done 3, and I'm going to enlist some of these things more as a way of accounting and acknowledging that these have existed. I was first the editor of the Council of Architecture magazine, which at that point came out of Bombay, which is the Architecture Time Space People. Then I was the editor with Indian Architect and Builder. And then the last run, which was I think the longest run, was with Domus India, when the International Domus had an India edition of Domus, which closed with the pandemic. But one has also written for the newspaper space, and one has written right from Mint Lounge to Midday to sort of Mirror. And there the challenge becomes is how does the field engage with who we call the common man. So we have a certain professional way of looking at the so-called common man who's not an architect, who's not a planner, and we always speak as if we are engaging with them, but actually we make very little effort, especially architects and the fraternity makes very little effort to sort of engage with the so-called common man. And I was lucky to have another opportunity to do the same. One is when you write for newspapers, which is once in a while, like writing the page on City for the 40th anniversary of Midday, or when the Rent Control Act was going to court, I wrote a small piece on the chawls, and I'll show you the Mint piece. I'll begin the slides from there. But also sort of curating the Kalagoda Architecture and Urban Design section for about 5 years, where by the nature of it being a city festival, you not only had architects coming as audience, but you had a lot of people walking in from the street to be the audience. And I think that's a very different thing of how do you speak to different audiences, because I think the question of media practices is speaking to audiences, and what are these audiences, and you're not speaking out of your vanity or your kind of your own positionality, but you're speaking to engage, and ultimately you're speaking to sort of build back the field of your practice, which is the field of architecture. And the third that I'll sort of is the exhibition one, which I'll focus a little bit more in the presentation, is something that happened not in a planned way. Even today, I sort of cringe a little bit to call myself a curator. By practice, I can sort of say that I am a curator, but I have never worked in the sense of being a curator, which is sort of decide that I'm going to do an exhibition. There have been at least 3 to 4 types of exhibitions that I have done, and they all came out of another urgency. So there are research exhibitions that we've done, what he mentioned, the state of architecture, the state of housing, that actually came from about 3 or 4 professionals coming together. In this particular case, Rahul Mehrotra, Ranjit Hoskote, myself, saying, what's the feel of the profession? Where is the profession heading? what has come into the profession, what has gone into the profession, and at this change of the millennia, where is the profession headed? So it came out of a certain angst and a certain kind of an anxiety within the profession that we said, you know, we could have put a book together. We could have had a series of panel discussions, but we decided on the exhibitionary mode that at those exhibitions worked at a national level. So it came out of a research inquiry from within the professional space. Then there are certain exhibitions which further a research question. So I think any one of us who has worked on books or a PhD, which is a book length material, one of the early exhibitions that I did was a research exhibition, and I did it because I was in an arts community. Everybody had something to show, so I was showing my research work. So it was not imagined as a research-based exhibition, but what I realized in that, and that's something that has stayed with me, is that the exhibition became a particular mode of presentation and engagement. It's one thing to write and one thing for somebody to read from a page. It's another thing to sort of physically and bodily engage with an exhibition because it is a spatial medium. It is a visual and spatial medium, very architectural in that sense. And you can explore your own research very differently when you have the opportunity to work in the exhibitionary mode. So in a sense, the exhibition as a research process. And finally, it was the exhibition as a kind of a reflective process, which has been many of the exhibitions that have been biographical, like say the mid-career exhibition of the work of Rahul Mehrotra, or one I'll show you, which is as a memorial to an architect who had a strong life of about 40-50 years, passed away in COVID, and just before embarking on a book project, one put an exhibition of his work as a one-year memorial. So you sort of use the exhibition as a reflective space. Obviously, it becomes the sharing space in all these three, but you're doing them with different purposes. So with some of these very preliminary keystones that I'm sort of giving you, I'll take you through a visual journey. I'll be quick. I won't be talking much because it's like some 90 slides. I just want you to sort of visually grasp them. I may just give you the name of the project and a very quick description, but I'll move through the images fast. Anuj or anybody else, we can engage more in the conversation. So this is quite a special piece for me. It was serendipitous that Mint Lounge, I don't know how many of you all know, but it's one of my loved newspapers today, because especially its Saturday edition called the Mint Lounge. It does very good reviews in terms of cinema, books, exhibitions, etc. And they were doing a design issue, and I was given literally a full page to write on architecture contemporary. And it was it was going to come in print the week after the sad and sort of horrific destruction of the Pragati Maidan Hall of Nations. And this was exactly a month or so after we had closed the State of Architecture exhibition, which I'll briefly sort of show you. And it was this sort of tumultuous moment. I was not even in India. I was actually working on another exhibition abroad, which also I'll show you. And I was getting this news from India that this absolutely sort of blatant destruction of the Hall of Nations had sort of taken place. And my entire piece, all of us write at the last minute. So although I was asked to write this at least 3 weeks ago, I was going to write it in the last 5 days. And I wrote this piece in a kind of angst, but taking a lot from the earlier exhibition, which was State of Architecture. And I think it was an occasion to sort of be able to sort of, in the press, and a lot of quote unquote non-architects responded on the question of the political and the design. It has always been seen as a kind of either high pedestal or something that only theorists and academics in an ideal world talk about. But I think it was an occasion to sort of showcase that politics and design or politics and architecture are not separate from each other. They are sort of messily sort of woven into each other. And if you think you can divorce it, there's going to be Hall of Nations destruction, literally. That's what's going to happen if the architects think they can divorce themselves politics. And I actually went on to make the piece constructive in terms of looking at a couple of practices which I thought engaged with politics in the way they produced their everyday architecture in our cities. So sort of in media practices, the media has the opportunity and the responsibility to calibrate the contemporary. These are purposely what I'm showing you from our Domus editorials actually, and I use the Domus editorials and cover pages very often to build a full lecture, because in a sense that's active thinking month to month. Every month you're writing like 1,000 words on what you thought about practice. So you're literally on your feet thinking on a daily basis. You're constantly trying to make sense, and the word millennial, because Anuj, I'm not a millennial, but yes, we are working in the millennial world, but you're working with a world that is in the crux of transformation all the time. It's sort of changing before you notice it is changing. So you're constantly dealing with landscapes between familiar and unfamiliar. You recognize something and it changes. And sort of how do you understand practice as a field of action? So practice is not something that you see as simply a production space, but it is actually an active space. How does an architect imagine practice as an active space? And this was an issue when the month that Zaha Hadid passed away. So this was state of architecture. I gave you a little brief that how it began. Literally, Rahul Mehrotra had published his architecture in India since 1990. I had just initiated a space called Arbor, which is where sort of Anuj and myself also formally met. And it was to say that why are we doing all these things? It's not that we didn't have anything better to do, but there was a certain sense of how do you build a sense of the contemporary, how do you build a sense of the urgency. And the state of architecture was a 4-year research project that shaped in this question of what is architecture in India. And the exhibition over research, it emerged from research. That's another thing. Maybe she will talk, Nisha will talk about research. Maybe you guys talk about research. It was not that we had the exhibition structure and then we researched for it. We actually developed systems of research from which the exhibition structure emerged. So we looked at the profession. It was in like a sandwich in 3 layers. We looked at the profession, literally questions of the profession. What books do we publish? What magazines do we feature in? How many newspapers cover us? What are the popular awards that we sort of have for the profession? How many architects to how many citizens? How is it comparable to different countries, etc., etc. This was literally a timeline of the books. Anuj mentioned something about books in his introduction. You know, it was surprising to realize that since independence, there was no real history of architecture written for India. We only had a very few catalogs or monographs, that is Charles Correa, Raj Reval and Doshi. No other. This may be difficult to sort of digest or believe, but it's true in a sense. It's only after the 80s, the 2 catalogs of the 2 exhibitions that happen as part of Festivals of India, you had 2 catalogs that tried to map a history of architecture in India. And yes, in the last 20 years, many catalogs or many monographs or many books on architects have emerged. When my book on Kadri came out, Brinda Somaya's book came out, Christopher Benninger's book came out, Bimal Patel did a book on Hasmukh Patel. So suddenly we had these history biographies, about 6, 7 of them emerging in the landscape. Yeah, so many statistics, etc., to sort of review. Then the second rung was literally a chronological study, a year-by-year chronological study of what buildings did we make. We were not making judgments, we were not saying best building, iconic building. We only picked up about 8 buildings that we thought were game changers in some way. Should I point it there? Huh. Okay, better. And we kept asking these questions, you know, when does architecture divorce itself from civil society, for example? This, I put in this slide purposely, I had not put in earlier. This has actually a reference to Vistara, which was an exhibition in 1985 done by the group of Charles Correa, Kamu Iyer, the entire Bombay bunch of architects. So we were sort of quoting another exhibition in our exhibition. A kind of a discursive space in the exhibition. And the third rung was basically we called for practices. We got about 30 projects from the last about 10-15 years. We identified about 80 of them for a detailed study. And the rest, all of them were in this sort of origami wall that we built. Why have so many architects become lifestyle designers? The whole question of second homes and vacation homes. And this was during the Kalagora festival, so we took some of the questions onto the public pavement, including working in different languages. So this is actually the opening of Vistara. The opening of Vistara was about all these big architects. What you see is Korea, Doshi and Kanvinde. They all drew the mandala line by line, each one, Romi Khosla, all of them, and that was the inauguration of the Vistara exhibition. That led us to state of housing. And why we came to state of housing? Because one of the key questions that emerged in state of architecture was the role of the architect. What the hell are we doing? You know, we are making buildings, yes, matlab, that's fine, that's a technical question or technical answer, but what the hell are we doing? And we went to housing because we found housing was one typology which was literally at the crossroads of society and architecture. And I was very happily surprised. A lot of my former students came for this exhibition because all of them, or many of them, were working in offices that were doing SRA or redevelopment projects. So it was interesting to see that you had a huge younger generation that was going towards housing. We used many of the similar research methods, chronological structure. This we said housing has a very important soft component which we captured through a film. That was also part of the exhibition. This was a detailed chronology. Again, we did a study of 80 projects all across India, and this was not only social housing. So right from high rises to redevelopment projects, to government projects, to private projects, we looked at a range of housing projects. Here what you see, you know, the classic housing. What is housing? Between the unit and the cluster. So this was a two-scale comparison of 80 units, of 80 studies that were in these racks. They would open, and then we had a structure to study each unit, which was also a delivery system, economic system, delivery system, etc. That's the film. Those are grabs from the film, just to give you a sense of, it covered about 6 issues. And a jump to an exhibition I did around zoos. Now what have I got to do with zoos? Even I asked this question when I was approached. This was a commissioned exhibition, like, would you be keen on doing an exhibition on zoos? And obviously I asked, why are you asking me? I have no interest in nature. I'm not like a nature lover. I align with sustainability, but it's not my passion. All of that. The interest for the museum or the organization that asked me to do that was my work with cities and Alice in Buleshwar especially. And they saw the zoo as this sort of important colonial structure that brought the world to the city. So my engagement with sort of looking at networks that make a city, they saw the zoo as that kind of a network. As you know, zoos, botanical gardens, like our favorite beautiful Vantara, a few kilometers away from here, is grabbing animals from all over the world. And that's how zoos were built always. They grabbed animals from all over the world, they grabbed plants from all over the world and brought them into cities. So this was something I worked with artists. So here the thing was, it was not a research or a documentation kind of an exhibition, but the research mode was working with artists who were engaging with some of these questions. Yeah, my research was exhibited in 2 ways. I did a kind of a cabinet of curiosity. Maybe you're familiar with this word, cabinet of curiosities. I can get into it in detail at some point, but those were early museums that existed. And so I did a cabinet of curiosities of many collected items, literally from our markets, that talk about animals. They make animals into comic characters, they make animals into icons and symbols, and how do we engage with animals generally as human beings? Yeah, right from Tarzan comics to many, many things, to ornamentation in architecture, to the small figurines that we play with as kids. You find these sort of right from the street to Hamleys, you have these packets which have zoo animals, farm animals, separated like that. And then I worked with 3 key artists. I had a Canadian artist who actually used the drawing medium. Now, if you know a little bit of a history, zoos, botanical, nature, these all were 19th century tropes of documenting the world. So I was looking at the question of drawing in a lot of detail, those that you see. I worked with Jitish Kalat, who had done this series on sleeping animals. How do animals look when they sleep? And some of the earlier images you saw were 2 younger video artists who were basically looking at ruins. You know that zoos and all also came from a tradition of the picturesque in the 19th century, where they created ruins to make them look more authentic zoos or botanical gardens. So how do we engage with history when we create ruins? And this was a beautiful kind of a 7-minute, very meditative video on the Sundarbans. And one of my favorite books on nature is The Hungry Tide by Amitav Ghosh. And the Sundarbans is like a rich field. And she made this absolutely meditative video. It's not a meditative space at all. It's like, you know, you may be there and anytime, any creature on earth may jump at you. So this sort of twist of how we look at nature and how it comes in different forms to us is what I was sort of exploring. Just quickly. Yeah, maybe, because I'm going quite quickly, but this is next. Yeah, this we saw. Yeah, these were the kind of drawings she used to do. So she made this sort of city out of these kind of drawings. And we are used to more precise drawings that document the world. Next. The sleeping animals of Jitish Kalat. Next. He was sort of, this is again Jitish Kalat's work looking at rotting fruit, but then creating these very galactic cosmic images. So this whole relationship between the details to our interest in cosmos, our different engagements with nature. Next. Next. So one thing to notice is also the exhibitionary mode. There's a lot of sort of spatial work going on. What you see, what you don't see. I have always worked with exhibitions out of my interest in cities that you never shut out the city. I don't want a white cube. You work with as many times you can see the city outside possibly. Next. And I also invited a writer. This is the first time I worked with a writer. So to bring text into the exhibition, she happens to be the great granddaughter of Darwin. And she is, she writes novels, fiction and non-fiction, both around questions of nature. Next. And the other thing, besides making that curiosity cabinet, I very often do a research table, because the exhibition is sort of also shows its working methods. Next. This image is actually from Bhaudaji Art Museum. Next. I jumped to this other exhibition that I did, the previous one only, which was 100 years of Bauhaus. And again, I was called by this museum in Stuttgart, which Stuttgart, we know less of it, but it plays a very, very important role in the way we understand modern architecture and Bauhaus coming via Germany. And Stuttgart did an exhibition critiquing the Bauhaus when it was 50 years of Bauhaus. So the curators revisited that critique of the Bauhaus, 100 years, so 50 years to the 50 years of critiquing Bauhaus. That was literally the title. And they invited a certain set of places that they felt were affected by or influenced by Bauhaus. Quick footnote, Shantiniketan and Bauhaus had some interesting connections. So I go to this question of design, and if you can quickly recognize those two objects, sorry Anuj, back. It's Gandhi's charkha, which you can easily recognize. Yeah, the charkha came out of a whole interest in craft in the early 20th century. It's a kind of a social art historical discourse that Gandhi also takes from and makes it his sort of national symbol, or the symbol of the national fight. And do you know why the lota is there as design students? Is this very small but very important essay that the Eames write on the Indian lota as the core of Indian design, which becomes a foundational text for NID. So I said, you know, Indian design sort of straddles this sort of thing between the charkha and the lota. And then there was a kind of a history of exhibition making, because India design has been explored through many exhibitions like GVK. The T2 GVK is actually a long history of making exhibitions of Indian arts and craft in public places, actually. Next. So then there was a lot of referencing exhibitions right from Crystal Palace 1857 to some of the recent ones, looking at the Baudaji Lad Museum's history through artist projects, because Baudaji Lad Museum is our own Crystal Palace in Bombay. Next. A lot of important writers and artists from K.G. Subramaniam to Binod Bihari Mukherjee who are writing on art, craftsmanship, etc. Many issues, to looking at architecture projects in the last 20 years that engaged with craft. So it was a packed museum, packed exhibition in a room that was even smaller than this space. Next. These are Ruchard Schroff's marble bulbs, actually, which I have found them extremely intriguing. Because Ruchard works with craftsmanship without the hullabaloo of I'm saving crafts. He works with craftsmanship in a very transactional manner, and I think sometimes transactional is much more respectful than using them and then making a trophy out of craftsmen. To this next sort of, this is one of the memorial exhibitions, but this was an architect who also worked a lot with craft and craftsmanship. So this exhibition was done in his office. Next. So this is his office studio space. So the exhibition begins in his office studio. Next. So we had sort of old panels, old materials. He worked with furniture, he worked with interior design, and he had worked with Gropius, this person. So I don't know, because I didn't meet him except for one video call. His office is in a large campus, like in like a large campus where his house is. There is a vegetable garden, and there is a workshop where the karigars are his employees working on a lot of the interior design stuff that he is doing, or he's salvaging havelis, bringing them to his workshop and making them ready to be fitted into new buildings or reconstructing. Jitendra Mistry, Ahmedabad, yeah. So the exhibition begins in his office. Next. Extends into the workshop. We reorganized a part of the workshop to become the exhibition. Next. These are just photo documentations. And you may not recognize him, but know this work. He was the one who did the entire Udaipur Palace renovation and converting them to the 5-star hotels. So we actually this was his idea before he passed away. We made a marquee, and that's the vegetable garden. So we actually made like a theater marquee and put it in the garden. So this was a very different mode of doing the exhibition, which we went into the outdoor space. This is how he creates, he salvages broken down havelis in especially Gujarat, Rajasthan area, and then reconfigures them in new projects. If you want to see his work, you have to go to Somaya Vidya Vihar. The university there, he belongs to the same family. His daughter's a part of the university family. So, next. So right from making marquees like that to making sort of sculptural installations out of his workshop pieces to photo documentation to using his own office space, it was literally a trek of an exhibition that over the weekend sort of people came to sort of move around the exhibition through a kind of a guided map and a brochure. Next. And from his office, that's a marquee in the garden outside of the Udaipur Lake Palace. Next. and he was a maverick art collector. So a lot of his collections became part of the exhibits of his projects. So we mixed the two. Next. 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 And from this sort of craftsmanship to sort of back to my interest in how the city itself crafts itself, or how the city itself builds itself. These are images from my book Alice in Buleshwar, I think, which we just finished 15 years last year. And I think it's been one of the guiding books that has been there sort of silently present in much work that I do. Because while looking at the city, one of the things for me was to look at the details of architecture and how does architecture speak to us. Next. This chapter pages, your city, my city, one of the debates we constantly have, whose city is it? And the city is a place where we all play games with architecture, labor, craft, production. Next. Next. And this sort of, this continuing interest in the city, I did the exhibition called Shifting City, which was part of the Arrival City. It was the Germany pavilion after the Syrian migration in Germany, where you had a lot of migration from east side of Germany to west Germany, to west of Europe, sorry, east of Europe to west of Europe. Germany was one of the countries that welcomed the Syrian migrants very, very quickly. And they did their Venice Biennale architecture pavilion on this concept. Then they asked 8 cities that were sort of migrant heavy to respond to the question of migration. And I curated the Bombay one, where I actually invited 3 artists to talk about the city. Next. These are photographs of Ritesh Uttamchandani. Ritesh Uttamchandani was one photographer I invited. Next. What you see here are sketches and drawings of Samir Kulavur. He was a kind of a drawing artist that I invited to work on this project. Next. And there was again a writer, a journalist, and my brief to her was write 10 columns of the last year. As if you were writing in present, in situ last year, write 10 columns from the last year. Rachel Lopez. Yeah. And then I had like 2 photographers, 1 senior artist. This was a marquee of, Sudhir Patwardhan, I'm sure you're familiar with. He did this sort of work on 8 large panels that is part of a private collection. You can see that if you're in Kolaba, the private collection, they let you peep in because the security is now used to this. But he very kindly allowed me to use, all artists make an artist edition of a work that they do. So I got the artist edition, which is sort of his 8 proverbs on Bombay, and a very senior photographer who does a lot of architectural photography, but he had these fantastic large aerial shots of Bombay from the high rises. So while Ritesh Uttamchandani, next. So these are the texts that came from Rachel Lopez. We published them as like a large book that you could sit and read, but they were also pasted on the wall. So again, another occasion I worked with text. Next. But these were Samir's sketches. I essentially asked him to look at the mall space as this sort of emerging public behavior space. So mall, common areas and food courts in the mall. Next. This is Ritesh Uttamchandani's photographs. His photographs were just about this small. Whereas the other large photographs were as big as some of those window spaces that are there. So it was a contrast of very large photography and very minute photography that you had to go close to the wall to see it. Next. The text, as I said, as book and as wall. Another German photographer that I used, especially because we focused this exhibition not on South Bombay, but on the suburbs, like Goregaon onwards. So he had a lot of images Bandra onwards. And he had this way of capturing the city, making it more glitzy, in a very pastiche way, making it glitzy. So I liked that, and that's why I used them. And we had research components from the Harvard study on the Borimolla redevelopment and the housing study that we had done. So it looked at sort of the city from research, from the artistic perspective, and it combined these different modes of seeing. Next. I'm done, actually. This is the last one. This I'll close with. This was an exhibition I did just last year. I was revisiting some of the concepts I've worked with as a researcher. They've traveled, these ideas have traveled or rather grown from Alice in Buleshwar to my PhD. And I could literally say this was a postdoc exhibition where I looked at the idea of the home and the world relationship. But I have been sort of arguing that the home is not really a safe and comfy space as we imagine. I think the world is a much more safer space in many, many ways. And I was purposely looking at occasions when people have found the public to be a safer space than the home. I have a COVID essay also that sort of writes about this. Next. So here I worked with 18 artists. So you have Rajesh Vora, the photographer, who has these crazy images of the Punjab village, which has now got popular after the Donkey movie and one TV series. But he was much before he had photographed this village in Punjab, which has these crazy water tanks of aeroplanes, Air Canada, Statue of Liberty, taxi, water planes. And this is Samir Kulavur, the first time he showed his series from marriage halls. And this particularly roughly the same is now in a full at BDL or the Bahaudaji Art Museum currently showing if you're interested in seeing. Next. I actually brought in from her dollhouse to a fashion house into this exhibition. I'm not getting into the details why they are there. You may find me crazy right now, but they all make sense. You just have to trust me right now. Next. This was, I did a documentation of the Kitty Sue, the kind of the LGBTQ gay bar space, especially the performances, the drag performances. And part of this exhibition, I hosted a drag performance. Obviously, I had the funding and the budget for it. So, Glorious Luna, a name some of you may recognize, Mysterious Munda, and Urmi from Dancing Queens. All three very, very different in their sort of LGBTQ status and coming from very different backgrounds. So part of this was hosting a drag performance in a co-working space. So I was also exploring the range of spaces we engage with in a city. So these were their costumes. This is sort of Glorious Luna's costume. This is Mysterious Munda. Next. Yeah. The whole drag performance and the shift of the body in space. Next. I had these very, very detailed ornamental photographs. So, you know, this is the Kitty Sue presentation. This is Sahaj's play with video games. And this moves to this sort of very sort of eerie documentation of the VT station, which is right outside this. So you will just have walked past the VT station and then you will see these images in here. So my interest in ornamentation continues, or craft continues. Next. Dayanita Singh, this was her series of Dream Villa. Next. Chirodeep Chaudhary, I'm only saying the names and the works to impress the range of material that has come in, actually. This is Chirodeep. So literally there are 4 photographers, and it's not easy to make 4 photographers sit next to each other. Everybody has a good, nice ego, but they were very beautiful and they all sat next to each other. All 4 of them use photography very, very differently. Rajesh Vora works very differently. Dayanita Singh works very differently. And this is Chirodeep Chaudhary. Next. This is a graphic artist who did her journalistic work as a graphic novelist during the anti-CA, anti-NRC Shaheen Bagh protest. So she documented Shaheen Bagh as a journalist, but through these sketches. And she has a book now called the Shaheen Bagh. A couple of other artists, senior, younger, etc., video works. Vishwa Shroff and her window series. This was again a fresh work that she had done and it came. And it closed with Dayanita Singh's this beautiful video that she has with Myself Mona, a project of this person from the Hijra community that she really followed her life through. And this is the last piece in the exhibition. It's also Mona very ill and narrating this shairi, which was sort of, as I said, I played with the body, you know. When you talk of city and city spaces, I've discovered that the question of age is playing a very, very important role. The aging body and the youthful body. The drag body is forever youthful, or it shows itself as ever youthful, but the body constantly ages. And this is sort of Myself Mona. If you know Dayanita's work in Myself Mona, it comes to this moment of this shairi when it's a battered hijra body that has gone through what it has gone through in life. Next. Yeah, and we got this dollhouse. This is actually taking from the Jitendra Mistry project. This is Jitendra Mistry making this dollhouse for his grandchildren. And since I was playing so much with home and spaces, I thought this dollhouse, which we fetishize this object, we sort of brought it into the exhibition. Obviously, this closes here. Obviously, you won't get the conceptual ideas for each project very clearly because that's not what I focused or detailed here. But this was just to give you a range that the work can encompass when one is working in this area. Yeah, thank you. So we've taken advantage of one speaker missing.
No, you've taken 4 speakers' time. Nisha, without any delay.
So thank you, Kevin. That was like a really interesting presentation, and yeah. So 1 minute, I'll just try. Okay. So I have timed myself for say 15 minutes or something like that. Okay. Yeah. So I'm going to talk about. So when I was trying to put together this presentation. First, I had very limited time to get it together, and also I think presentations like this, when you're invited to talk about your work or where you are, like the domain in which you're working, act as these reflective moments where you start looking at your own work. So I think after a really long time in life, I got that kind of an opportunity. Otherwise, I have been presenting projects or presenting my PhD work or something like that. So this is a space of reflection, and I am, as I look back at my own work, right from my bachelor's years to now, I think I have been constantly trying to explore or understand the meaning of place, and place as a socio-spatial construct which is constantly being produced by people, histories, and which is remade through narratives, routines, embodied mobilities. And I'm also using the figure of a spiral because I came across this very beautiful quote some time ago, but it was about self-healing, where we revisit the same moment. So I had written on my post that we revisit the same moment in circles, but with new perspectives. But my friend corrected me that we revisit in spirals, and each time our spiral keeps expanding. And I think that's very true for my own practice. So I have pulled out a few projects out of my decade-long engagement with understanding place and mediating place. So one of my most initial engagements, so Kevan was my teacher as well, okay? So he and a few others have been very instrumental in the way I have understood theorization, engaging with text. So these have been very important inspirations for me. So I think I was just out of college, and given my background and my positionality as a middle class student, and seeing a lot of built environment practices that were not really responding to the ideals that were being discussed in college, I thought one of the key interventions or space of intervention might be architecture journalism. And I thought that creating built environment consciousness might be my calling. So that is also how I got, like I graduated. I was working with the research cell, which means I had a research slash writing based practice, but I also enrolled for a journalism masters at CEPT, and I got the opportunity to work as an architecture journalist at Times of India when I was studying. So at that point, as the culture beat or the architecture beat journalist, like very inspired by somebody like Jane Jacobs or Ada Louis Huxtable, and charged with this feeling that, oh, I'm going to write about architecture and going to like change the world. And like how Kevan said, I'm talking to the masses, I'm talking to the common man, I'm talking to, like, the anonymous at large, and that is the space I'm going to work with. So at Times of India, Ahmedabad, I got the chance to write in the Sunday editorial spread. I got an opportunity under a very, I think, risk-taking editor who allowed me that space to explore. And I think Ahmedabad also was a very wonderful site in that sense, because it had a lot of interesting architectural practices, and each Sunday I was moving through one architecture practice at a time and trying to talk about architecture, built environment, and also at that point, Ahmedabad was had filed for the UNESCO World Heritage status, etc. So there were these kind of concepts or ideas that I was moving through. So then, cut to, I was back in Bombay for personal reasons, and I was again trying to navigate opportunities where I could continue working within this space of looking at architecture, looking at place, and like back in 2010 or 11, the lack of opportunities is what propelled me to find my own organization, which is the People Place Project. And the People Place Project started as a research initiative. And I'm still shy to say I'm a publisher, but I do operate as a publisher now. And it came from, again, I think I had my audience always in sight. I wanted to talk from the space of, I didn't want to have a peer-to-peer conversation. I wanted to have a conversation with people at large. It has definitely got to do with where I come from, what is my background, etc. And so one of the key projects, like in People Place project, that we began our journey is, and I think there was a methodological inquiry where there was a conceptual framing that we wanted to look at an ethnographic understanding of, or an ethnographic process, and come at certain kind of plural readings of a place. So that is how we began that investigation. It is by chance and by advice and by contact with certain kind of people who already practice publishing that we decided to convert it into a publication project, which is the People Called Mumbai series. And that is how the foray into publishing world began. But so again, so that was like a framework. I always say that People Called series is a framework of trying to study or trying to document a city or trying to put together an anthology of a place. However, that gave me the opportunity of asking with every project certain questions, that is there a possibility of having a plural telling of a place? And how do you find, if you want to investigate and if you want to really encounter these plural tellings, how do you actually do that? Do you do it like a journalist, or do you do it like a reporter who goes around hunting for stories, or do you do it like a wanderer and allow the stories to come to you? And also something important to note over here is the process of putting this book together. So it is, I will not say it's crowdsourced, it's narrow sourced, in the sense that we put out a call for application, people apply, a lot of people know about the city but don't know to write. That is where the training of being a journalist, or being trained in particular forms of writing came handy, and we conducted these writing workshops through which these writings got generated. So partly it was pedagogical, partly it was documentary. And the idea was to see how different people from different walks of life, who perhaps do not even have any expertise in, or the so-called expertise of domain knowledge, etc., can contribute to telling of the narrative of the place. And I think that was a very interesting exercise, because right from students to anthropologists to certain kind of scholars to historians, we've had a range of people contributing to these projects, and each time it has opened up certain aspects, and that has sort of transgressed these disciplinary boundaries in that, like very, very early for us. So, moving on from the People Call series, we went on over the last 5-6 years to create a range of different kind of publishing projects. So we, of course, People Call series, we moved across different cities came to us. So we have those volumes, but other than that, we also started engaging with children's literature because we wanted to test out the collaboration between an artist, writer, and an urban thinker. So I'll just, yeah, so I don't know why it's pixelated, but like, for example, on the left-hand side, you see this collaboration between Vinita, who's a very accomplished writer, and Kripa, who is a artist and also an artist who has great politics at, like, you know, as her intent of art. So we came together, like I think it's always a collaboration between the publisher, the writer, and the illustrator, where we came together to look at a story of this little girl who has found a olive ridley turtle in her father's fishing net. And she races through Varli Kolivada to let the turtle back in the water. But that particular thread of the story and the way, like the way the Kripa has interpreted Varli Kolivada and the way she has tried to put it together. So these were again our experiments in trying to see how literature or how literature around built environment can work. Like again, another project where we use graphic novel as a medium to explore the Portuguese history of Mumbai. So, okay, all right, Portuguese history of Mumbai. I'll not dwell on these more, and actually I wish I had got the inside pages to show you all, you know, it would have been much nicer. So the other project that, yeah, I think I want to spend some time talking about is the project that I edited, the Avaz, and it's a more recent project, and I feel that this project, like I said, this is going to be a reflective talk, and I feel this particular project changed my positionality about how we need to engage with the writing, or, you know, the world of publishing, or writing about built environment and writing about the urban. So I was invited by Govandi Arts Festival as an artist in residence to document the community. So that was the task at hand, to, like, you know, do a narrative documentation of the community, which means I had to move through the community and, you know, interview people, write about them. But I think, and just to give you a slight orientation, if you all don't know where, so this is the M East Ward where Govandi is, made up of a lot of rehabilitation buildings. Are you all aware of Govandi? Okay, great. So a lot of rehabilitation building where people from different parts of the city have been just plugged and plonked over there. This is how it looks like with Shivaji Nagar, and then these massive rehabilitation projects, and at the edge of the freeway of like a project, and another project that is sort of supposed to, like that's the story of mobility in our cities, right? Where you are flying over literally parts of the city which you don't want to engage with. So that's the Eastern Freeway, and so this Natwar Parekh compound is over here. So this is where Govandi Arts Festival is conducted, and it is a festival, or it is an intervention by this organization called Community Design Agency, in a way to create a sense of identity among the youth, and also to claim place or claim space for their own selves after this whole violent process of rehabilitation that their previous generation has encountered. So as I was like going back to like the process of interviewing and working with the community, I think I sort of admitted like I'm trying to find the right words. I admitted to myself, this is not my story to tell. This is, I have no experience. I am very removed by class, caste, living in the city to actually speak or write about them. And then in that case, what is the process of engaging with a project like this? Yeah. So these are some glimpses from the Govandi Arts Festival where the community come together to, claim space through these kind of art projects. So how I shifted my methodology is that I decided to adopt the role of a facilitator, and I also conducted workshops to co-write this project along with them, which is why I'm the editor on the project. I'm not an author, I'm not a curator, but I'm an editor on the project who went through a series of workshops with willing participants from the community who decided to contribute narratives about the community, about their lives through the process. So I think my past experience of having conducted these workshops and conducted writing workshops primarily came useful over here but it's a different process. Like with each group, it's a different kind of workshopping that happens. So over here, I think I took a real back seat in terms of what the book or what the volume is supposed to do. So I became an active listener, very, very important. I also hoped and created a space of like collaborative, empowering exchange. By that I mean what we used to do is every Saturday, we used to have something called a circle time in the community. So like the participants, who have volunteered for the project, we would come together and I would prompt a few things and they would start sharing their experiences. And it is also one of the first times for many to start. I think it's the same for us also. Like nobody asks us, what is happening in your life, why have you come to be where you are. So those processes were very very emotionally charged moments for many people, and also it takes its own course. So we need to also take a back seat and allow that that kind of a momentum or things to happen, because it can lead to interesting opportunities for the community. And yeah, I think these processes, because we met every Saturday for almost 4 months, there was a peer community that got formed around the project. And it provides certain opportunity and agency. Even when I write that, I'm very hesitant to write it because I feel it's very pompous to claim something like that. But I still, in a more reflective mode, I think that yes, it does provide opportunity and some agency. And I think I will sort of conclude with my own PhD work, where a lot of my experiences and learnings through the various projects that we have done at People Place Project, I feel that's a part of us, right? We keep assimilating these different experiences, learnings, etc., into our own work. So my PhD work looks at walking. It actually looks at urban mobility at large, but again, I am trying to see how a participatory, feminist, methodological or epistemological inquiry can co-produce knowledge about mobilities instead of, a very traditional way of research where we go with, certain frameworks and we try to understand people, communities, etc., often which we are not a part of, and how we can also sort of give more more space to grassroots level knowledge, because something like walking is very embodied knowledge. It is not something which is unusual or, which only the experts, if I may say, have that kind of knowledge. We embody certain kind of knowledge when we walk every day in the city, like we are strategizing, we are navigating. So the group that I'm working with are women domestic workers, And I particularly chose this group as a feminist scholar because I wanted to, of course, work with marginal, like, I wanted to have gender in my work. And I think when we look at women domestic workers, it's a doubly marginalized community. One, you are marginalized because of gender, and second, you're marginalized because of the kind of economic bracket you fall in. So yeah, and I think that has given me opportunities to work on these comparative projects where one of the projects we are working on is looking at the comparative between Mumbai and Lima. So what are the experiences of women domestic workers here in Mumbai and in Peru? So of course, like when we look at spatial justice through these kind of frameworks, you realize, you understand more about urban form. So for example, Mumbai, we have like this interspersed geography where the lower economic and the higher economic locations are close to each other. And the fancy concepts of 15-minute walking city or 20-minute walking city are by de facto already taking place for a lot of people, because it's like most of the walking is done by urban poor in like a city like Mumbai. While that pattern is changing, especially with so much of resettlement and rehabilitation, that pattern is shifting. People are being taken and put in these faraway corners, so their mobility patterns are shifting. And when when you resettle people, you're thinking about housing, but you're not necessarily thinking about livelihood and how mobility and livelihood are very interconnected. So, at a policy level, and in a place like Lima, or like in a Latin American place like Lima, where spatial segregation is a part of its urban form. So the core city is an elite city, while the the urban poor are in the peripheries. And like they have these crazily long hours of commute to come back to, come to work in the core, because that is where you will get livelihood. Often many women spend up to 2 hours on an average to travel from their place of residence to their place of work. Yes, maybe there is not a lot of walking involved, because there are these modal choices they constantly shift to sort of account, like to economize their travel. And the traveling for them happens within that modal exchange, like when they shift from a matatu to a BRT, or from a BRT to a shared rickshaw. So that is where their walking happens. So it's different than our case, where women within a small geography walk up to 12 kilometers on an average every day. So yeah, so I think I'll pause there, where again, like I think through my PhD work and other research projects that are going on, that I'm a part of, we are I sort of really campaign, like again, because I think spatial justice is at the heart of my work at the moment. So need for more reflexivity, because we need to really critique and understand our positions, and also challenging the power dynamics which are inherent in many research practices, and create space for more collaborative and empowering exchange. And also, over a period of time, I'm trying to explore how research and that process of like the mediation basically can be a two-way exchange between us as the researcher and the people whom we are working with, the people whom we are researching on. And of course, like I said earlier, co-creating knowledge and acknowledging grassroots level knowledge. So thank you so much.
Hi. First of all, thank you so much, Kevan and Nisha, for actually kind of taking us through your practice in so much detail. I think that itself shows that, that there's so much that goes into thinking about architecture that often it is, not even discussed. And there are such few people that are able to extract it out and bring it out in the public domain to even make people who are not from the field to realize that what goes into all this. So it was really heartening to see all the detailed kind of works and the way from these small beginnings, I would say, by writing a simple small article in a newspaper for both of you, to graduating to editing, to a book, to exhibition, to curatorial work. So I think that those kinds of steps, it's very important to note, acknowledge that it almost takes like what, 2 decades to reach there. And also the arcs that are there, like starting from an interest in research, or simply kind of an interest to talk about something in a more engaged way, to actually translating that form of simply writing to for a kind of exhibitory space, where people can engage without the jargon of the written word or the discipline. So it's very, I mean, I was all along. The first important thing that struck me through your both your presentation is how both of your practices, like all other media practices, try to bring architectural knowledge in the cultural domain. It doesn't keep it in the bounds of the discipline, and in that there are so many kinds of avenues, and we have to constantly reinvent ourselves as we go along as cultural practitioners, I would say. And in that I want to like pose the first kind of question about the agency of media. And I want to understand from you that, since you both have been so closely engaged with different forms of media, what kinds of agency do you find with different kinds of media that you've engaged with? And you also brought out this point of calibrating with the contemporary. So if you can, both of you can speak about how media helped you to recalibrate, and in what way, that will be really interesting. So if any.
Yeah, thanks Anuj, and thanks Nisha for that wonderful presentation as well. Uh, One is, I think we work with other spaces because in architecture, besides learning by example, there is no other way to do it as such. I don't know what your experience of doing the history theory course at CEPT was, but besides one or two such courses we don't have, and I know that the debate is always alive at CEPT as to, how is this course to be taught, what's the nature of the program, what's the nature of the training towards. So it's an area not clearly articulated in terms of its education. So I think we teach ourselves through other parallel practices and learning from there. You will, it's also, I think, comes from the context that I think you mentioned it in your introduction, the urban turn that architecture took. So at one level where architecture took the real estate turn, I think the resistance to that was taking the urban turn in a way. So to say that, architecture is not sort of the economic system, but it's a people's system or a culture system. So I think it was, we also all grew up in that atmosphere. So probably we imbibed a few things from that. And two of the three magazines, because in two of them I played a fully lead role. In Indian Architect and Builder, I was one editor with more of looking at certain sections. Didn't bother about the whole magazine. But, because people, Architecture Time Space went to all architects' houses, which I got very often a response, and I had that in my mind that, they may have husbands, wives, children who may not be architects, and what should be of interest to them in this magazine. And Domus, I found a lot of people responding that because one invited, like I think in the last few years of Domus, I had a poetry section. And it was like, how did you bring a poetry section with full justification as if it was most necessary that you have to have a poetry section in an architecture magazine.
Also art.
Art was, yeah.
Domus
but you know, art you may
time.
feel that art and architecture go hand in hand in that sense.
Art and architecture together before Domus.
Yes. So I think then that magazine sort of from architecture had a wider outreach also. So there was partly it happened and partly one was conscious that, you know, will somebody pick this up even if you're not an architect and see this magazine. So the media space has to be thought through and understood in terms of how it is circulating, how it is existing, etc. Yeah.
Just to extend that, how do you think is the media, like the journal space different for you from the exhibition space?
So journal space, as I mentioned also, no, one thing is the pressure of producing 90 to 120 pages every month. And I myself would be writing, if not more or if not less, 3,000 to 5,000 words every month. Like an editorial, sometimes you're like, the magazine is going to press, the designer is working, the copy editor is working, and you're sitting in the screen and saying, ab ye man ne kya likhu, that kind of a thing. And then once you have an idea, then it just shapes into another 1,000 words. So that pressure is very different, and you get exhausted of that pressure. But you also miss that pressure sometimes. So that's very different. An exhibition has a long arc in that sense. And I think the two, state of housing, state of architecture, because they're encyclopedic, they will have a long run. Like I can share that in March you will witness 10 years to state of architecture. So we are doing another edition to 10 years of State of Architecture, because State of Architecture was 2016 and we are in 2026 with much that has happened. So they have long historical arc. But the other smaller exhibitions that you saw, they are sort of high moments of inquiry, reflection, concentration, and they leave you with ideas that then you can slowly keep, you know, like a cow, pull them out of your stomach and you think about them again for some time. But that high point has suddenly brought in a lot of ideas that way.
So I will actually springboard from what Kevon was speaking about his experience in the magazine space. So when I was working with the newspaper, and I worked for almost 1.5 years at Times of India, Ahmedabad, I found it extremely exciting that, you know, every day, so my day job, or, you know, my core job over there was to lay out pages. And because you already have AutoCAD experience, etc., it's like, yeah, you're very quick at it, and you're working along with many people who are just entering that kind of a digital space. So you had a leverage. However, that going week by week, and the fascination that, you know, I'm writing something this week and it has the possibility to get published this week was extremely liberating, because otherwise the processes that we are in as architects is such a long process. Even the act of conceptualizing a building to building it, etc., might just take years. So this kind of rapid turnaround, of course I didn't have the pressures of an editor, I was just like a journalist at that point, was very exciting. And, you know, I think that sort of excitement has stayed with me about every book that we have produced, that, you know, there is a closure, and, you know, there is something that now we are going to produce, put out, etc. But I'm coming back to your question in terms of agency. So to my mind at this moment, it's about access and ethics. So who has access to media? Okay, and I think I'm also becoming a person, because of my own politics, very tuned to observing power. So I think who has access to media, like what is it that they produce because they have access to media. So I think they are very important questions, and whom do they give agency to then, therefore, like it might be us also, like when we are in positions of power, and how do we sort of curate those spaces or conduct those spaces. And um, I also feel the ethics becomes a very important factor within that, you know, what are the ethics that we are working with, like especially like when we talk about gender representation, like representation again across socio-economic classes, which also is applicable for architectural projects, like in terms of what kind of architectural projects do we choose to talk about in all the different media that we are consuming right now. We have like these fantastic podcast guys, yeah, and then we have these very interesting social media channels, etc. Like sometimes I'm very fascinated with the way and what they are producing, etc. So I think that, and I enjoy to see what kind of position they are taking. So yeah.
I'm just curious to ask you also that since you have stayed with media and your respective medias for so long, and speaking to the question, like, do you think that discussing about or bringing out a certain discussion point has impacted something? And if we could illustrate through any examples, and in what scale can we possibly impact or not impact or negatively impact, or what are the you know, chances that we can change the course, if we may say, of things, and the way and the sheer reason that we pursue our practice in this space?
So quickly thinking on my feet, I'll talk one from magazine, two from exhibition. Uh, the magazine thing I can think of right now is very internal, but time and again across all the three magazines that I worked, one had a lot of architects returning saying that, and when I teach criticism, I use this in a detailed as a case study. They came back very often saying that we reviewed our practice on the way you were looking at our project. So the churning that one spoke about in the practice sort of cycle, I think that's partly a job served. That if the practice was sort of looking at a critical review of a project and saying, okay, why is he saying this about my building? Why is he saying this about our project? This is not something we thought about. This is something we didn't think about in this way precisely. Like, just to give you an example, like, you know, in the piece I wrote on the CEPT library by RMA Architects, I actually, in a spurt of writing, it was not through the research process, it was in the spurt of writing that I said that it reads like a coward. Coward. It reads, the building is like a coward, the way it opens and closes. The coward is the Rajasthani traveling shrine. And when Rahul read it, he said, I never made that connection. And he has a fascination with coward and collects cowards. But he had not made that connection, and I had made that connection. So those are moments that you feel the sense of reflection is working. So that's very internal, but it's useful. I think with things like the state of architecture kind of an exhibition, also connecting with your earlier question, because it was at the National Gallery of Modern Art, which is like on a tourist map, we had tons and tons of non-architects. Like a friend who teaches philosophy and she said, you know what I received on my school moms group? There's an exhibition at this round building opposite Regal on architecture, and it's quite nice, we should take our kids there. So they didn't know state of architecture and all of that. They just felt it was an exhibition with a lot of photographs of buildings and we should take our kids there. So those, and at the same time there were architects like Neera, there were Shimul, many of them, Srivatsan, Revati Kamath at that time, they said, you know, this is for the first time we've been in this, we know everything you're telling us, you know, but we've not got this perspective. So now this exhibition has given us a perspective. So from a common perspective to a professional perspective, I think that impact happens. And the last exhibition, it sort of emotionally touched a lot of people. The Home Wala exhibition, yeah, the Tark one. Because I think it played between this question of gender, age, without saying gender, without saying age, without saying trauma. It dealt with a lot of these questions, and a lot of people came out saying, something has touched me. It's sort of emotionally heavy. But I didn't realize, I realized it also when I finished the exhibition. It was not my intention in the process. I had a very theoretical question which I was dealing with. But when I put that Dayanita Singh's Myself Mona video, and I had not asked for that video. I asked for some archival material. Dayanita said, I don't have anything. Even the book is not really available. We found one copy on Amazon, so we got it. She said, if you want, I'll give you the video. I said, yeah, give. So when I put the video and the exhibition over, suddenly that diagonal emerged from the Kittisu drag performance images to this old sort of hijra woman narrating this shayari, which is very close to what is this life that I have lived. And come and challenge me now, I have nothing to lose in a way, you know. And suddenly this age question sort of emerged, and it was relevant because I was talking about how people are engaging between their private and public lives. So there are those kind of things that happen.
In fact, I was going to say that within, like, you know, the recent architectural history or memory, like state of housing and state of architecture were very important moments for a lot of us who visited, and you know, it was a very important moment of reflection. And so in fact, I was thinking of when you asked this question, that these were like very pivotal moments of discussion about, you know, within our domain, that has not really happened maybe after that again as well. If I just reflect on my work, so I don't know if this answer will really suffice, but nevertheless, like, because most of the processes have been collaborative, that is, it needed a group of people to come together to put together that volume. Um, it has had its own life sometimes. Not always, but in some cases, yes. Like, for example, when we were working on people called Lucknow, so we have an anthology of 55 stories, which means typically sometimes people contribute more stories, but in people called Lucknow, 55 people have contributed stories. And the curator of that volume, they like both the curators, they were interested in exploring the heritage question. You know, what does history mean? What is the definition of heritage? And these were the questions that they were exploring through the stories. And that group, like, you know, that writers group that came together, they were all in from different walks of life, were trying to answer that. So at a point, like after the book was released, etc., it took this turn of conservation movement. And of course, like, you know, people like us exit out of the group, but it has continued. That kind of a collaborative effort has continued over there. So that's like one of those moments within, like, all these kind of different projects that we have done. And then again, the children's book that I was talking to you about. So the children's literature space operates in a particular way. And with somebody like me coming in, who's very heavy on urban, like, you know, who's also beginning to talk about spatial justice and concepts like that, marginal communities, because like we were looking at Varli Kolivada and the Chawls, and so through our initial projects. So there is again a space of conversation that emerges within that group. And then the writer, the illustrator, of course our politics align, and then they are taking forward those conversations. So each time a book goes to a reading or the book goes to a festival, you are talking about these different, like, whatever conceptual framings we have wanted to explore through the book. Like the recent one being Bhavna Jaimini's Happiness City. So where she's talking about, like, how do we make a happy city? So she says, just like, she very radically says, throw away all the architects, planners, etc. Let's get crayons and, you know, start drawing the city. She talks to children. But then it begins a conversation that can cities actually be defined, designed. So there is a conversation that has started within this literary circles about city making, etc. So which I think is a very interesting turn that is happening within the children's literature. Yeah, I think pretty much, yeah, that.
Your responses have brought me to this whole kind of uh, relationship between media and research, because I think both of you started by saying that you were interested in research, and but you started engaging with media in a like why I'm saying this is because today curatorial space is much more about I mean, first is exhibition. I want to also distinguish between exhibition making and curatorial work. And it's very interesting to see how your work has slowly moved into the space of the curatorial, which means that it's a particular way of selecting, organizing, showing, and structures of display and politics of display and all that. And in that, before I open to the audience, I want to kind of talk to you about this, that how does the consciousness of operating in a certain kind of media change the way in which we research, and how does research take shape within the space of media then, or how does, because research is often considered to be a very scientific disciplinary kind of space which leaves very little room for an external engagement, but what does it mean to bring research and push it in the space of media, and how does, and your practices are very organically kind of slid one into the other. So I mean, just reflections. I know it's a heavy question, but if you would like to reflect and
So, one is that there are long running projects like um, Alice in Buleshwar was a project that was happening when I didn't even think it was a unified project. Till I started writing these small essays for a fellowship that I got. Then Yoda Press approached me for a book, and I was writing the book when I was doing PhD coursework. And many things added in on the journey, and then that became the PhD project. And then you've written long form, like as I was just saying, my piece on the chawls in Neera's book, or the long essay on Shikhavati for Abhanara and Lamba and Rashmi Podar's book, etc. So there's one which is constantly going on, and many small satellites may come in and go. And actually, I know when I was struggling to write, which is the phase you must be in, to saying, okay, now Kaivan, finish the PhD and get it done with. And what helped me, I had a spurt of writing, which was not the journalistic writing, which I could start putting together and sort of getting my chapters out of them. So it was a long running. Whereas the magazine, again, the same answer, that it asks you to think and do work on your feet on a monthly basis, which means, okay, I have a project today, it may go 3 issues later. But in those 3 issues, I'm also thinking of 3 issues. So it's not that I'm brooding over the same one issue for 3 months. Yeah, so you're doing fast work, which also has its own merit. So sometimes people say, but you spoke to me last week and it's already in the magazine. I'm like happy to see it that way. So I've never realized, but there is, I think, some kind of exchange that sort of happens there. And I don't know if it's personality or if one can train oneself, but also the kind of writings are very, very different. So one has sort of moved into one kind of writing to another kind of writing to another kind of writing very easily. Sometimes that's a bit hindering also. Like I couldn't write very academically for my PhD work. But since I had a repertoire of work and a little bit of a reputation by that time, I was given the allowance. Okay, once you claim that you have a certain experience, you can, well, I had a liberal university, a liberal research center guides that gave me that allowance. So I did all the protocols of research writing, but my tone was very sort of moving in that way. So I think the sustained and the immediate are simultaneous or in my case, they were simultaneous. I don't think that can be made into a template, but I just had that opportunity to be simultaneous, yeah.
So I think I have a very different answer to give. So my master's, because it was a journalism master's, it was called Humanities and Communication. A lot of the training was in social sciences. So, and like all good social scientists, they have a lot of emphasis on research methods, and so like coming from architecture, they were all very new things for me at that point. But I think that sort of exposure made me a geek about research methods, research methodology. I always say I'm a good research methodology person. Like I can address those different quant, qual, interpretative. I can address that. I like that space a lot, and I like what it does to research, and I like what it does to scholarship. So I like observing those patterns, and I also see that happening in my PhD, because one of the chunkiest chapters is about contributing a methodological alternative, or like the inquiry is methodological. So I feel that exposure early on, in where you don't make complete sense of it but you are exposed to it, sort of gave me that routing background, etc. But it is when I was at IIT for my PhD is where I had to rigorously engage with it. And IIT has a very different non-liberal system of PhD, like it is a very standardized, like how it, but I think I really enjoyed that. And I always feel that I was very conscious of the research process to an extent that I document for every project that we've done. Like as a blog, we documented that this is the process that we followed, and what does it mean when certain kind of people collaborate, and what does it mean, like, because certain things, you say participatory research, etc., on paper, very exciting, very democratic, etc., but when you try to really execute that on ground, it doesn't really happen. It's like a very hard process to actually make a participatory research participatory. So then questions like, is it really participatory when you're moving through certain kind of hierarchies and you're working with certain NGOs, etc. So like I think, so I
So do you think that coming from a certain kind of publishing space affected it in any way? And how, and for example, this kind of understanding when moves into a project like Voices of Govandi,
Avaz, yeah.
Avaz, uh, and that's a very curatorial kind of
Yeah.
work, but it's informed by a very research sensibility, right?
Yeah.
But it's being written for a very
Yeah.
local audience.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to understand this, the disciplinary meeting uh, the everyday.
Yeah, I get what you're asking, but I feel that I have often not had opportunities to talk about the research process. We often talk about the product itself, or what has been the editorial or curatorial intent within it. It is only within academic spaces that you find opportunities to talk about the process, if that answers what you're saying. But there has been a process, and I'm sure that is there for
No, of
everybody.
course. I actually meant to ask you how. How has it influenced?
So, for example, if like we take the case of Avaz, when we were like it's a ethnographic participatory research. So, how it informed the final form of the book is that there were these interns we had from Shrishti at that point who were documenting the place through drawing. Okay, so that found a way into the book. That is one. Then when we were talking to people, these research circles that I spoke about, we recorded that because the hope was to transcribe it later and use it in some form of writing, etc. But then during the process of transcribing, we felt that there was more value to what they were saying as it is than putting it in the book as a text. So we carried these QR codes within the book, which you could scan and hear them speak. And also at the festival, we made a small exhibit, like we made a reading table. So all these 12 stories, which we finally narrowed down on, it was designed like an accordion book. So on the one side of it, you have the visual, and on the other side, you have the text in Marathi, English, Hindi, etc. And the voices are constantly. So, you know, this was one
So,
of the ways the process informed
got it. So what you mean
media.
to say is that research is able to take very different forms rather than being contained in the classical form of the textbook or the book. So yeah, that is what I meant to kind of call out from you. Thank you. At this point, I have many questions for them, but I want to open it to the audience if they want to ask anything. Yes, Aditya is there.
Hello. So, a lovely discussion around archiving exhibition space and how it evolved. So, I was interested, like, I had 3 pointers which I quite was interested in. First is, I'm like, in terms of media and the literacy it brings around. So, since the 90s period, the media has intensified circulation of images a lot. And I am thinking in terms of architectural images, do y'all think architecture today is, in terms of its public image that we talk about, is as much important for its spatial experience? Like, do you think because of images, the whole idea of architectural image is becoming more important than the architectural spatial experience that we speak? And in what ways has this shift changed how like the public inhabits architecture now? And what is architecture then socially or politically or symbolically? That is like one question. And in terms of archiving as a process, archives are like no longer passive repositories. They are becoming quite active agents of bringing in conversations. Who are we kind of highlighting in terms of who is getting archived, whose work is getting archived? And I'm thinking in terms of archival practices in India that produce certain forms of authorships and counter histories. I want to understand, especially in relation to communities and the work you do in terms of public engagement, what does this mean in relationship to those communities and places that are then omitted from the main political discourse? Like, do you see a change happening? What is their engagement then? Like, how does this shift happen in architecture?
One of us to answer, or generally we answer? Um, See, images have also always been there, you know. The circulation of magazines is about at least 30, 40 years, even from Raddiwalas, you know. Magazines circulated. It's not that every house may have got a magazine. And you've had pattern books for years. At least the last 100 years has survived with pattern books that your, you know, carpenter will come to your house and say, कि मतलब वो sofa कैसा चाहिए? Pattern book में से you will take it. So this logic of working with images has there. Yes, you're right in the sort of the surge of images. So the digital media brings the surge, and everybody, like, you know, during COVID, I said everybody who has an Instagram account thinks he or she is a public intellectual, because they just start speaking online and they think everybody has to listen to their bullshit. People speak bullshit. Everybody can't be a public or in that sense. So it's the same with, it's the same that media will always throw these kind of things, and you will have to deal with it. I have often also asked the other question. Why do we prioritize the spatial to the visual? So I think there's a bit of a modernist project there also, in terms of sort of imagining that, in fact, a lot of my PhD work argues that architecture is as much visual as much as it is spatial. So, which is why I think, you know, we've sort of not worked on the idea of the facades of buildings. So either we relegated to sort of style of the 19th and previous to 19th century styles, or we sort of have problem with real estate sort of facade making, because we think facade making is not design, which is a problem, I think. So I think we ourselves have sort of given too much importance to the spatial, which is not to say to take away that importance, but there are other ways of experiencing architecture, and the visual is very strong, and we've not paid attention to that. So I think so sometimes when you don't pay attention to it, it's going to surge, and then you don't know what to do with it. So there is that area of problem. The archives is a culture, and I think as much as we are a culture, at least up to my parents' generation, which must be your grandparents' generation, had a certain because of the economic structure, have a certain logic of use, reuse, repair, keeping things for a long time. Today what we sort of fetishize as heirlooms and my mother's sari and grandmother's recipe, we fetishize it today, but otherwise these things existed in the house like it was a normal thing to be done. So when we talk of institutional archives, etc., we are in the public sphere, we are very bad with archives. We have very less history with archiving. See, all the museums, etc., that we inherited were either palaces which were never accessible to the common man. Those have suddenly become our cultural heritage, or museums that have emerged in the colonial kind of history and that experience. So, and the other that we see is very sort of tangible material. Intangible material. So, in the public sphere, we have not really paid attention to developing, growing archives, records, etc. So that's a weak area that we have as a national space. I can tell you that many projects that I've worked on, I myself don't have those archives in a way. Like Alice in Bhuleshwar photographs are archival now because that place has changed quite a bit. Or 10 years of Domus is archival, but I'll tell you very frankly, maybe I'm the one who has it in my laptop and not anywhere else. So I think this is an institutional structuring which needs professional thinking. It's not about your and my consciousness. Your and my consciousness contributes to a larger culture, but it's not something that can be done just by you and me. It's institutional thinking. Yeah.
I think I'll springboard from what Kevan is saying. And I think Anuja and I have been also lamenting about this for the longest time, that we don't have a culture of archiving. And we don't, even like, at a very individual level, do we really document our own work? Do we really document, like, as an institution, like an architectural college, how do we reflect and archive our own practices? So I think this has been like a lament, and I agree with Kevan. We need more interventions at an institutional level. And in fact, CEPT is one of the few like institutions in our field that has an archiving culture, right? And there is a professional archivist over there, and there is also a lot of architects are donating their work to like improve or build on the archive. So yes, and that second part of your question where you were asking about what about certain other kinds of practices, I don't know how to answer that, because I strongly feel that it is a very recent phenomena where new practices, young practices, or practices are addressing spatial justice, So I think one of the ways in which they are trying to tackle that, I'll again speak of organizations like Yuva or CDA, that is, I think you all know Sandhya because she has taken a workshop here. So how they are trying to do it is through engaging with the community and seeing what and how the community wants to archive their own experiences and their own selves. So yeah, so I think it's sort of like an emerging space, and we are yet to see, and I think all of us are like going to contribute to that that inquiry in some ways or the other, and it applies to other like allied disciplinary fields also. If you take mobilities, if you take housing, so how, and and the nature of how we want to document, archive, yeah, is, I think we sort of just discovering that. Yeah.
Even in other fields like Tata Institute of IFR, all of them have sort of functioned together and archive. I think PIFR, I think, was also just 20 years ago. Uh, Sarai tried to do an archive in a similar, like a precursor to what Nisha was doing with her projects. It didn't really fruition into archive, where all of us were young researchers contributing to this sort of generative archive. Uh, then CSCS in Bangalore was trying to do a newspaper archive in just when internet was coming in. And that's still very different from sort of imagining that I'll Google and I'll get whatever newspapers I want. So I think archiving has to have a institutional and field structure and imagination that a business house or a governmental or a scientific organization feels that it has to have an archive, put its history together, etc.
um, what is like sort of playing out. So, which is probably why there is lesser agency among certain communities, or there is emerging agency. I don't know. So, yeah, that's also something one needs to be conscious about.
Sure. We'll take her question. No, can we take her question first? Can we take her question first?
Hello. So my question is, have you seen any impact of your work through media? Because one of the key dimensions of media is to impact the public and create a culture and reorient public opinions. So has it changed the way you approach a project, or has it affected your own practice in a certain way?
I think we already discussed that. Yeah, we already discussed it. You can go back to the recording. Nishad.
Uh, I had two questions for Kaivan, like, and two for Sandhya. Sorry, two for Nisha.
Can you make it one and one, because
Okay, okay. So I'll start with Nisha.
yeah, please.
How do you adopt roles and shift positionalities as a writer when you are doing an ethnographic account of a particular community? What is your process for positioning yourself as an observer to write about a particular community? Because you said, how do you enter the field? You either enter it as a journalist or a wanderer. So how does that aspect change when you enter? And what is your take on writing when it comes to writing about embodied knowledges, especially? That is something I was curious about. In like for Kaivan, I was wondering ki, you made a statement that a field starts a self-evaluation through an exhibition. So, because you've worked so much, so now if you had to like set benchmarks for the evaluation of the field, what would those benchmarks be for the contemporary field? And one thing which I was curious about, you mentioned Bauhaus and Shanti Niketan and their connection. So I wanted you to elaborate that connection.
Who, who would like to go first?
So, I think I love the second part of your question about how do we write, represent embodied knowledge. Okay, so I think a lot of people are trying to answer that. And my way of trying to tackle that is co-producing knowledge with them and acknowledge the voices whom I'm working with and not appropriate those voices. That is my commitment to the work that like I'm doing alongside with them, if that helps. So I use a lot of quotes, I use a lot of walk-alongs, videos or photographs that they create, or so those are my ways of mediating it. But there's a whole lot of literature and work that is going on about embodied knowledge and how one represents it. And very quickly responding to positionality, I think we should not confuse it with the mode or the medium. So a journalistic exercise is very different from probably being invited to write an essay in a magazine or in a book or in an edited volume, or write a report. So there are these different ways of writing that I think with practice and attention one can move, because each has its own code and grammar. So academic writing, like Kevan was saying, has its own code, and once you understand that code, you can play around with it. It's like learning a new language. And while journalistic, I think he will differ with me, but nevertheless, so journalistic writing has its own code in terms of inverted pyramid and things like that, because there's a logic to why you write that way, because maybe when you put it in a newspaper, you'll have to chop off the bottom part, so the least important information comes at the bottom. So it has its code, and which you understand through engaging with that mode of writing. So positionality, I think, is an ethical position. Who you are as a journalist, as a researcher, that will just be the same. So it is about what kind of work you're committed to create at that point, owing to whatever your alignments are at that time. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just tempted to say a little bit more on what you were saying. So positionality and writing, two things separately. So just quick examples. See, when I edited the Council of Architecture magazine, I can't fully have my own voice because that's a Council of Architecture magazine. So I have to say certain things. I may have certain ethics, those will come out in the magazine, but they have to come out in a much broader agenda. But when I am the editor of Domus, first of all, Domus has a 100-year history and a 100-year-old positionality, into which my own positionality has to fit or balance it out. So there it can be that, Kaiwan's time period of Domus, or when Kaiwan edited Domus. So sometimes we know phases of magazines or newspapers through editors, because the editor's positionality and the brand positionality worked in tandem or whatever. So there is that structure, and writing, actually, I think you just have to read a lot to know how they differ from each other. The magazine, or to be an editor, is literally all the time asking the question and resetting the benchmarks. That is what you do month after month. So every time I'm reviewing a project, I'm asking or saying that there is a benchmark emerging in this project. So it's an active role that you play as an editor to keep either regurgitating certain important benchmarks, reviewing and rephrasing certain benchmarks. So you keep reproducing them. Or like what Nisha began by today saying, reflecting on your own work. So that benchmarking as an editor, you're doing month after month, literally. And as I was saying, we did State of Architecture 10 years ago. Now we as a curatorial team are, I have done many lectures reflecting on what did SOA set out to do? What are the urgencies today? And 10 years later, we may sort of reflect that, not simply to reflect on SOA, but to sort of set up new benchmarks, or ask for new benchmarks, or review why did the old benchmarks not answer the questions, or how did they answer the questions, etc. So it's a constant sort of back and forth process. You will find this other information online, because just before I did the Bauhaus exhibition, there was an exhibition on the Shantiniketan Bauhaus Connect. Which is why when I was invited to curate, I said, I'm not going to do the official Bauhaus India connection, because that has been done. And I really don't have any new material to say, because that's not my area of work. But I actually said, if Bauhaus engaged with design in this way, How did India engage with design? Through the English colonialism. See, there are two strands that I identified very handy. Obviously, you'll have the Italian and the French also, but I'm saying broadly, you have the whole English discourse on the arts and crafts movement, and you have a German discourse on craft and labor. And I was just sort of looking at that India went through the whole craft question through the English colonialism question. Whereas the Bauhaus question comes from a different economic history, but it relates with Shantiniketan at a certain kind of a national emotional question. But this material you will find online. I know there is a brochure. I don't know if the brochure is online as a PDF, but there is a little book on that exhibition. And I don't know if students of architecture read Stella Kramrisch, the classic, one of the classic works on Hindu temple architecture. Stella Kramrisch was from Bauhaus. And very close to Shantiniketan. Itin had connections with Shantiniketan and color theory and those kind of things actually.
Thank you, Kevan, for those pointers. And I think it's already past 8, and we have had a very long session for both of them. But thank you so much for spending so much time and showing your work, addressing all these questions, and thanks to all of you for bringing those questions. We should also call you to speak more about this very exhibition. No, and also all the exhibitions, because I think now all of them I can see the sparkle in the eye to think of these connections, and I urge you to go and catch Kevan's other exhibitions as and when they come. So thank you all, and we'll meet in the month of January now with our next CCT conversation, because now we are going to break for the winter break with Christmas and so on. So we'll keep you posted, and thank you so much for being here, and thanks to both of you.